Bienvenue sur Analyses du monde, la chaîne dissidente qui donne des informations peu connues et multithématiques.
Canada was a very stable, middle-class country with reliable institutions. To say that's gone is to say almost nothing.
Canada. Under Justin Trudeau, the former British colony has sought to position itself as the global bastion of progressive politics.
We have become a totalitarian state.
As his cultural revolution shows no sign of abating, I went to Canada to find out how ordinary Canadians are dealing with Trudeau's radical reforms.
The sexualization has become militarized.
From the promotion of gender ideology
What the f*** is that?
Do you want to talk about it?
to the legalization of drugs,
Overdoses are up, violent crime is up. It's a jungle.
radical new suicide laws,
Do you think that they want you dead?
Yes. I think it's wrong.
and clampdowns on freedom of speech.
I think our leader, Trudeau, I don't think I've ever heard him say a true word. All this nonsense about compassion is the manipulations of snakes pulling in the useful idiots who perhaps are genuinely compassionate, and that's Canada.
My name is Stephen Edgington, and I'm a journalist from The Telegraph. I began my investigation of Canada in one of the country's most liberal cities, Vancouver.
So we're here on Vancouver's downtown east side, where the situation, whether it's open drug use or violent crime, just continues to get worse. And every day,
Possession of hard drugs, including heroin, cocaine, and fentanyl, has been legalized in the city. To find out the impact of these new laws,
Aaron.
I met up with Aaron Gunn, a filmmaker who has documented a rise in homelessness and crime in Canada in recent years.
Aaron, tell us a bit about what you do here.
what I do here, well, I just came off filming two documentaries in the downtown east side of Vancouver, documenting the incredible increases in homelessness, kind of just general societal chaos, and the explosion of open drug use here on the streets of Vancouver, and really on the streets of every major Canadian city.
What's going on in Vancouver then?
We've seen the street order explode. We've seen open drug use explode. Overdose deaths are up more than 1,000% in the past 10 years. Here in British Columbia, the province where Vancouver is, we saw more than 2,000 British Columbians die last year from overdoses alone. Every day in Vancouver, 4 people are randomly attacked.
Who is to blame for this chaos in Vancouver?
Well, what I was told when I was making the documentary by one small business owner is you get what you tolerate. Would you like to add something? Why is that? Making a documentary?
But the thing is, how can you talk when you haven't seen one day of struggle in your whole life? You haven't gone through one day of struggle in your whole life. Just because you want to make some money.
I'm not making money off this. I'm not even, this isn't even my documentary. Thanks.
Bye.
Right, let's move. Let's go. So we were just filming on a corner near Hastings Street, which is where some of the worst homelessness is, and a lot of people came up to you. They seem to know who you are. Can you kind of explain what happened?
Yeah, we didn't get very far through the interview, did we? Yeah, it was just, we haven't been back here since Canada's dying blew up. Whenever somebody suggests, for example, that handing out more hard drugs or destigmatizing drugs like fentanyl and crystal meth might actually be making the problem worse. I don't think that's a radical position to take. It was pretty much a consensus up until 5 minutes ago, and now when you put a documentary out about it, you put a lot of people up against the wall, and I think that's what we saw.
These issues are impacting many cities around the world, San Francisco being one of them, Portland in the United States. What is it about Canada specifically that has caused this huge rise in homelessness and crime?
There's nowhere in the world, as far as I know, that has engaged in this level of permissiveness when it comes to these dangerous addictive substances like fentanyl and crystal meth. And I think there is the root of the problem. If you could snap your fingers and get rid of these drugs tomorrow, you would solve 80% of these problems.
Another filmmaker who explores the streets of Vancouver is Chris Elston, better known online as Billboard Chris. Chris agreed that I could join him on one of his outings in the city.
My whole goal is to start conversations. It's to have conversations and start conversations. So that was really effective. So I had some signs made. I had 2 signs made. They said gender ideology does not belong in schools. And when you talk about this, all hell breaks loose.
Gender ideology, what the f is that?
Do you want to talk about it?
I'm queer, I'm 78, and I've always been queer.
Okay, what does that mean to be queer?
I like men. I've always liked men.
Well, I'm a gay man, I'm not queer.
Well, I
like men, I'm not queer.
Well, f the word thing, idiot. It's just a word. I identify as queer.
Okay.
If he's closed mind to accept some other word, okay, I'm gay. I just wanted you to know, I've known, once I came out, I realized that I've always liked guys.
Okay, can I have a conversation with you for a sec?
You have to read the sign. You cannot read it? I can't read it. Doesn't say anything.
Okay, let's just slow down for a minute. Can I have a conversation with you for a sec?
No, because I got a doctor's appointment, I gotta go.
Okay, I support the gay community 100%.
Okay.
We shouldn't be giving...
I'm gay. I'm gay and I support
Okay, you are gay.
I support this.
I support
You
this.
support
I
don't support child abuse. I don't support child abuse.
That's right.
I'm gay, and you know, when I was young, I was a feminine, fake kid. You know, if I was a gay, feminine kid today, they would have whipped out the old dick saw, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
They would have taken my manhood.
Yeah, these kids who would grow up to be gay today are being taught that just because they're effeminate little boys that they must be trans.
This is also about the erasing of gay men and lesbians.
If a boy's effeminate, if a girl's masculine, beautiful.
Right.
What's wrong with that?
Right. I don't know what happened to the Western world. I haven't lived in Canada for 30 years, but it has changed. Man, 30 years ago, this would be unconceivable. I don't like even coming back to the West, you know. I don't recognize it anymore, you know. You're the man.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate you. Canadians don't want to be on camera if they're supporting this. It's pretty rare.
Why?
Because they might get in trouble at their job. They're not all afraid, and we'll run into them if we stay here long enough. But if people have any sort of corporate job or work for the government, they don't want to be on camera. They're going to get in trouble.
Are you worried about talking about this sort of thing because of your job and things like that?
Yes.
What happens if you say the wrong thing? What could happen to you?
There's ostracism, a lot of ridicule and mockery. I've worked at other places with evangelical Christians, etc., who have stood up for their faith, and the ridicule begins. I'm technically a leftist, but the way everything slid sideways now, people say, well, you're a conservative.
I really like your videos.
Thank you, sir.
I believe what you say. Everyone goes through different things at different stages in life, and people are just jumping to conclusions instead of just letting it happen as it is. When kids go through puberty, they usually figure it out. Right. Like my mother, she's a lady, full biological female, and when she was younger, she didn't like doing the girl things. But she's always said it did make her a boy in girls' clothes.
So you're touching on what this entire ideology is based on. It's based on one thing only: stereotypes.
Yeah.
That if you don't conform to stereotypes, that maybe you're not the sex that you are. What utter nonsense. This is the most regressive ideology in history.
So what do you think of Chris then?
I think he's doing some work. People need to be informed. My brother liked to hang out with the neighbor, who was the girl, and she had Barbies, and all you ever do was go over there and play with Barbies. Well, in today's society, shit. My parents would have had to mutilate it. Otherwise, they would have been taken away.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To find out more about the consequences of questioning gender ideology in Canada, I met up with Amy Ham, a nurse based in British Columbia.
Why don't you tell me a bit about yourself?
So I'm a registered nurse by profession, and I also do some freelance writing and journalism. And I'm a single mom with 2 boys. I have a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old son. And I guess in the past 6, maybe 7 years, I started writing and talking about gender ideology. I'm fighting to maintain my nursing license.
So what sparked this all off? Why did this all start?
The 2 members of the public who complained to my regulatory body were incensed by my involvement in putting up an I Heart J.K. Rowling billboard. This billboard got a lot of attention in Vancouver that has a huge population of very hyper woke, kind of lefty people, and that triggered an investigation.
Canadians are known as the world's politest people.
Do you think that that's a misconception in terms of how you've been treated by some Canadians?
Yeah, I don't think Canadians are necessarily polite. Maybe it's more passive aggressive could be the right word. And if you hear psychologists talk about the way that some people deal with disagreement, it can be like physical aggression, or you can do more psychological things like reputational destruction and trying to destroy someone that way. And I think as a country, it's almost as if Canadians have chosen to do that. That's what cancel culture feels like here.
The promotion of transgenderism in Canadian schools has led to a fierce backlash from some parents, not least those who come from Canada's ethnic minority communities. Multiculturalism has become a key pillar of Justin Trudeau's vision of Canadian identity. In Toronto, I caught up with a family originally from India to discuss their experiences of modern Canada.
Hello.
Hello.
Come on in then.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Stephen.
Stephen. You're already shooting?
We're already shooting.
Bang, bang.
Should we go upstairs?
Mom. This is Stephen. Stephen. My mom.
Hey Mom, how's it going? So tell me your background. When did you move to Canada?
I'm Indian. I came from India after marriage. Came to Canada in 1974, July.
When you came to Canada, what was it like and how has it changed in terms of multiculturalism?
Racism was there. They're not happy that other colors are coming. So they were throwing eggs and calling them names. Many things were happening. But still that gone very soon. After 1980, it started improving. Now, so many taxes, they are increasing. It looks like that 50-50. 50 government is taking from us and we have only 50. That's not fair. And before we were happy, like living like middle families.
Justin Trudeau says that he represents people like you. He says that he loves multiculturalism. He loves the fact that Canada is so multicultural, so many different people from different societies. Do you think that he takes your vote for granted?
Yeah, definitely. He took our work granted, and he is saying multicultural. He loves multicultural. We love multicultural too. I think every human like it. But bringing from every country and not seeing their back record, so many criminals can come too, and crime gonna go very high. So there should be some standard to bring people.
So Niranjan, why don't you tell me a bit about your background as well?
So I was born here a year after my mother arrived. I was born and raised 70s, 80s kid. Growing up in an 80s, 90s Canada where I was privy to multiculturalism in a very organic way. It wasn't some United Color of Benetton commercial. This was full on, everyone taking the piss and laughing at everyone else, making fun of accents. We all got to tease one another, playing street hockey with our ridiculously curved sticks.
But to use their language, you are a diverse individual, and they would expect you to have a certain set of beliefs that come along with that.
100%.
But you don't.
Absolutely not. Because I'm not stupid. It's very transparent. I work in a community that is all about the hustle. Sex workers, drug sellers, pimps, everyone's hustling to make it. I am used to being around people lying all the time. So when such a big hustle is being thrown in my face, I've been around it for, like I said, almost 15 years now. It's so obvious. I'm just like, that's just a hustle. That's not even a good hustle.
You've got a son, grandson, and you've experienced the gender ideology being pushed on your child. Can you tell us what happened?
My son goes to an alternative school within the Toronto District School Board, which his focus is on the arts and social justice. In the last few years, the sexualization has become militarized. It has gone full, no pun intended, balls to the wall. They're full on aggressively ramming it down, no pun intended, everyone's throats. It's a Wednesday at around 6 p.m. I get an email that says, tomorrow is Gender Odyssey. Please bring your kids to school with the other opposite gender's clothing. We're going to have a fashion show. The teachers are going to dress in the opposite gender clothing. We're going to have a presentation for the kids. again, we're talking kids from, grade 4, kids from the ages of 4 all the way up to 11, 12. And I was like, what? They ask me and send me emails and forms to sign when he's crossing the street to go to the, for a field walking trip. And yet they're going to start teaching my son about sexuality, other genders, and God knows what other aspects of sexuality they're going to bring into it without my permission, and that I'm supposed to send him to school with girls' clothing so that he can dress up as a girl and then have a fashion show with all this happening. I was like, no, that's not going to happen. And that's the other thing. At school, they always have the cultural month. So when it's the South Asian month, they've combined us with, so it's just Asian month. And so me and the East Asians and the parents who are, they want us to come in, they want us to cook the stereotypical Indian and Chinese food. They want us to come and talk about Indian culture, sports and languages and things like that. There's a double-edged sword. We're like, we want your food, we want the kitchen, the camp, and we want everything. We want the image of what your culture is to come in and then leave. But don't bring your actual fundamental beliefs about God, spirituality, and generational responsibility. Don't bring any of that. We don't want that.
Do you think that Canada is a warning for what can happen if things go so bad?
Canada is an experimental ground, for sure, right? It's just as much as Australia is. I think these are both and New Zealand as well. These are great places that don't have the amount of tradition, and it's not close to home. Like, if England's gonna fall, these extremities are gonna fall first.
Part of Canada's social revolution can be witnessed in its extreme new euthanasia laws. In 2016, Justin Trudeau's government passed legislation enabling assisted suicide for terminally ill Canadians. To find out more, I travelled to Montreal to meet with Christine. Christine, thank you so much for allowing us into your beautiful home. Why don't you tell me a bit about your story, your background?
I served 10 years in regular force, Canadian Armed Forces and artillery. I soon early got injured training. When I jumped into a trench, my knee fell out of joint and the spine followed.
Not only were you a veteran, you also became a Paralympian.
About 2008, I was introduced to kayak. It seemed that I showed some talent in it, or I was approached to try out the sprint kayak, and I did, and became a 5-time world champion.
Wow.
The first thing I remember feeling when I was on the water was this sense of serenity and plenitude that I had not felt for so long. To me, it was as if I just found another way to keep serving my country.
So you've done a lot for your country. How do you feel Canada has treated you in return?
Complete abandonment. There was a time at first when I first became a veteran, the services were a lot better. Since I became a veteran in 1998, the government has gone to sell out or privatize our services. Now it's the second time, and they just done it again now. It took 12 years between renewals of my wheelchairs. We're allowed to have one every 5 years. I don't like to have to ask, it's been 5 years, give me a new one. If it still works, it still works. But 12 years, it's not normal. 7 years after my wheelchair, I asked for the second one, and it took 5 years to get it. This is completely ridiculous. I'm in the works right now waiting for the renewal of an elevator to be able to access outside my house.
Can you tell us what happened when you asked for this? Was it the ramp outside you needed?
Yes. I said, I just can't keep going like this. I can't keep living like this. This has to be done, this has to be resolved. And the person stated, Madame Gauthier, if you really feel you can't go on like this, if you really feel you can't do it anymore, you have the right to die. So it's like, wow, I can't believe, after all of this time, not only will you not give me the equipment I need to live, but you will help me die. I have been suicidal and in complete desperation for the last 10, 15 years. And suddenly you just come out and tell me, if you really can't go on anymore and you feel you can't do it anymore, you just, you have the right to die. It's really hard to understand this when you still are maybe blinded enough or stupid enough to believe and think that your government is there to help you and not to end your life because you're becoming too pricey or too much of a problem.
But presumably you want to live, and this person telling you that you had the right to die must have been one of the most awful things that anyone could tell you after all of the things that you've been through.
Yes, I think that if I want to live. Nobody ever asked me, like, of course if someone asked me, what do you want to do today? Well, if I had the choice, I would want to go and run. I would want to go and do many things. So right now, yes, I would like to be able to live, but with autonomy and dignity, and do things for myself as much as possible.
How many other cases do you think there could be in Canada like yours?
My God, I'm terrified to hear the numbers. Because, like I said, personally, I didn't even know there were others. Whether you push someone in despair enough for them to commit suicide, which we all know the numbers are astronomical for veteran suicide, or whether they get to have the attention enough to get made, it's not different. It is the same for me, whether you will provide the room to do it or so, or just let them crawl into their own hole and die. What's the difference? For myself, I've had been close many times of committing the act. If it had not been for my mother still there and somehow are calling me at this moment, or for these, my dog coming and sitting literally on me when I was about to do it, whether they were, I don't explain why and how this has happened, but it did. I don't think it's a government's place or an hospital's place to decide, yeah, okay, you're a little depressed this week. Here, sign this paper 3 times. We'll ask you, you sure you want to die? I think it's wrong. I think it's wrong, and I think it's just gonna keep drawing this country into a deeper hole.
Not everyone is opposed to the euthanasia laws. I spoke to a clinician who assesses and administers assisted dying.
So most of my career has been with abortion care, women's health, reproductive rights, social justice. And then I've just tried to integrate what I believe in with what's happening on the ground. And so when the legislation came through in assisted dying, it was the same year that we got mifepristone in Canada. So mifepristone is the drug that people can take a tablet for abortion. So my skills and need for doing surgical abortion was limited, and I thought, oh, there's an interesting change in the law happening, which is also about social justice, which is also about a person's autonomy. I wonder if I might like to get involved in that.
In terms of the future of the MAID legislation, there's some interesting developments going on. Can you talk a bit about that?
So what we are anticipating in next March is that the legislation will not have mental illness or mental health disorders as a restriction. If a person's only reason for seeking assisted death is that they have a severe and incurable mental health disorder, then they can consider their application considered to be assessed.
We know from people who attempt to commit suicide, who are depressed or have mental health issues, but who survive, some of them say that they regretted it. You're adding a new layer of controversy, I suppose.
I'm quite reassured that the level of scrutiny and the level of assessment is very tight. I do believe that the clinicians are involving quite a number of consultants to determine eligibility.
Canada has changed a lot in the last few decades. As you mentioned, multiculturalism, all sorts of people's beliefs around religion in particular. From a Christian perspective, suicide is seen as a sin. Do you think that Canada has become a post-Christian nation?
I don't think Canada was ever fully a Christian nation because it had such a strong Indigenous culture, which obviously is not Christian,
of course,
in its core. I agree in many religions that suicide is not considered all right. Having said that, I have dealt with a number of situations in assisted dying where there has been a priest present and we have together formally ended that person's life.
One other area where Canada perhaps shows itself to be unique in the West in terms of issues of morality are these new laws around assisted dying what they call euphemistically made.
Oh yeah. Orwell spitting in his grave.
Do you think that in a Christian nation this would happen? And has Canada become the first real post-Christian nation?
Well, we're not as post-Christian as you can get. But yes, I would say in the West, are we the first one? We're certainly in the front runners. And no, I don't think it would happen in a truly Christian society. And I think Christianity and Judaism, for that matter, and in all likelihood Islam, is actually a bulwark against such things. Because at least you start with the metaphysical presumption, at least in the Judeo-Christian corpus, that there's some, each person carries with them a spark of the divine that the state has no right to interfere with in the least. Quite the contrary, must be respectful of. And independent of that, I also think that if you're the sort of fool who thinks that the government should have the power to aid people in their own death, well, you've got a lot of thinking to do, buddy, because why would you presume that the government is trustworthy enough to do that? I'm an opponent of capital punishment, not because I don't think there are crimes that are sufficiently heinous to deserve death, because there certainly are. And if you don't know that, you don't know anything about crime. And then now we're giving the state that power, well, on compassionate grounds.
For a nation to be truly woke, it must have its own narrative of oppression. In America, activists focus on the country's history of slavery and racist laws. In Britain, they focus on the empire. To try to understand Canada's equivalent narrative, I spoke with David Lees of the Frontier Centre for Public Policy.
Today we're going to be talking about your rights and freedoms.
These woke campaigns, they all have their own narratives and histories and backstories and heroes that they take from history. In Canada, what do they focus on?
Well, in Canada, we don't really have much of a history of slavery at all. So I think that when it comes to our very mixed relationship with Indigenous peoples, the story of our relationship with Indigenous peoples, particularly through residential schools, is a very classic case to be used then as our critical race theory issue.
So in Canada, there is this narrative around what's called the Indigenous genocide. Can you just break that down for a British audience?
In Canada, we have been fed a narrative that we're a genocidal nation. And these are horrific types of claims to make, especially for Canadians, because Canadians deeply care about fellow Canadians and including Indigenous people. Now, there have been historically many examples of poorly thought out and conceived policies against Indigenous people, but it's a narrative that does not do justice to the history. Part of that is through the residential school story, where the country of its day was trying to figure out, well, how do we engage Indigenous people in this new economy? And so education was always seen, as it is today, as a key door opening to integrating people into Canadian society.
Let's talk more about this Kamloops mass grave site. So the Kamloops Band, which is the sort of group of Indigenous people there, they put out a statement a few years ago saying that they'd found this mass grave site and they'd done some scans of the grounds, and they claimed that there were 215 disturbances within the grounds, which they said were evidence of human remains, even children who were basically being killed or wiped out. Is that actually evidence of a genocide? Have they dug up the grounds? Have they found the bodies?
No evidence has been found to date. In fact, the sonar seeking devices are not indications of any grave. To suggest otherwise is utter nonsense. So those claims need to be investigated, like any other claim of a crime scene. They need to be looked at.
As you say, crucially, they haven't actually dug up these sites.
No, they've not been excavated, they've not been exhumed or anything like that. So it has really become a kind of a bizarre type of claim. This is not just simply about the story of residential schools. This is the story of how a nation has, I believe, been infected by a really destructive, hate-filled ideology of wokeism. We are truly the canary in the coal mine when it comes to G7 countries.
So you could actually be facing prison time potentially if you question this Indigenous genocide narrative?
Well, certainly if you listen to the openness of the current Minister of Justice federally, yes, we have a risk that they will seek to criminalize any questioning of the residential school narrative or the claims of mass graves, which is utterly absurd. Part of history, part of science is being open-minded to healthy debate and evidence seeking as we work to find the truth together. That's part of civilization.
Questioning the Indigenous genocide story already has its consequences. One such dissenter is Jim, who I met in his home in Vancouver.
So you were a teacher, you're no longer a teacher. Why?
One day 2 years ago, I was teaching Calculus 12 to older students, and news had broken right across the world about 215 children being murdered in an Indian residential school. And I thought, well, that's not really right. That doesn't make sense. Teachers don't murder their own children. It's not good for one's career. It's, but much more seriously, it's it just is such you can't bear witness, as Commandment 9 says in the Bible, against your neighbor, bear false testimony without having evidence, without truth. So all I said that day to students, and I was expected to reproduce the narrative about, oh yes, white Christians had just made a mess of Canada and had done so forever, and they were mass murderers now. And in Canada, the men and women in this particular school in Kamloops, it was Oblate priests and brothers and Sisters of St. Anne. They devoted themselves fully to the education of young people. They came from Europe to do so. The idea that they put children in incinerators or hanged them and secretly buried them at night and all that sort of stuff is just, why would you say that to students if it's not true? All I said was the kids died from disease, and they did die from disease. Nobody has since questioned. But I was walked out within half an hour of mentioning that one comment, suggesting, I didn't even say it wasn't murder, but the very suggestion that it wasn't genocide. They walked vice principals walked me, frog marched me out of the school. And I haven't been teaching since, and I've been told that I never will.
Do you think that Canada is worse than other nations?
Well, I've heard many people say that it's worse in Canada than elsewhere. We've gone off the rails more than probably anywhere else in the world. And as a teacher, for me to be afraid to tell kids that there's such things as boys and girls, you know it's gone a little bit ridiculous.
To prevent wokeism from spreading, it's important to have a strong opposition party. Canada's Conservatives have been historically weak in pushing back against Trudeau.
So be strong. Thank you. Yeah, you want to take a photo?
I'd love to. To discuss the failure of Canada's Conservatives, I met with the leader of a rival right-wing party, Maxime Bernier.
Thank you. I always fight for you. Thank you. Thank you. Have a nice day. Thank you.
Does that happen often?
Yeah, sometime, yeah.
So Maxime, for British viewers who don't know who you are or what party you founded, can you explain your story?
Yes, I'm Maxime Bernier. I'm the founder of the People's Party of Canada. We created that party in 2018, but before that, I was a conservative. I was elected in 2006, and I was part of the Harper government, the conservative government here in Canada. They don't have any principles. They're just, they try to everything to be elected. And I said, I don't want to be part of that.
But isn't it the case that the Conservatives have a new leader, Pierre Poilievre, who's far more conservative and more on the right than Andrew Scheer or the previous leaders? So he's taking the party more in your direction, I suppose. So what's the point in you in that sense?
But Pierre Poilievre was a real conservative during the leadership contest, because he knew that to be the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, you must speak like a conservative. So he did that. Now his goal, like Andrew Scheer, is to be the Prime Minister. And we know that the big cities are leftists and liberals. So what he's doing is going to the left to be sure to be elected. That's why he's not speaking against mass immigration. That's why, he's okay with the radical gender ideology. That's why Poilievre voted for the Bill C-4. The Bill C-4 in Canada is the bill that criminalizes parents and therapists who want to help gender dysphoria kids. And if you do that, you may go in jail up to 5 years. But that bill also is doing the promotion of the transition. And for me, there's no transition. You have boys and the girls cannot be a boy and a boy cannot be a girl. But for the Conservative, and every member of Parliament voted for that bill, voted for the bill C4. So we don't have any opposition in Parliament right now in Ottawa.
So we're next to the statue of John A. Macdonald.
Yeah.
You can't see him.
Yeah.
There's actually a little sign on, he's been boarded up. Why has he been boarded up?
Because of the woke ideology, and they try to impose their history on us, the new vision of this country. But what the first Prime Minister, John A. Macdonald, did for this country, I believe that is a great history.
So it seems that what's unique to Canada in a way is Trudeau himself as a leader compared to other Western nations, because you could look at the COVID lockdowns or wokeism or whatever, and they apply to lots of Western countries, to most Western countries. But what I'm interested in, I suppose, is what is it about Canada itself that Canada has gone so far to the left? And maybe you disagree that Canada is an outlier compared to other Western nations. You can explain
No,
that.
I think we've gone further down the woke road than any other place, except perhaps for California. I think part of the reason for that is that we were an early adopter of the doctrines of group rights. The Francophones had rights, the Indigenous people as a group had rights, the Anglophones had rights. There were 3 founding peoples, and group and individual rights had to be balanced. And I don't think there is any such thing as group rights, because there's no such thing as group responsibility. So it's a non-starter conceptually. And so in some ways, the table was set in Canada for the rise of a more universal doctrine of group identity and group rights. And plus, Canadians pride themselves on, being nice, let's say, and, and not being offensive, and just hoping that everyone will get along. And, there's nothing glorious about incivility, but there's very little to distinguish excessive niceness from weakness. And the problem with being nice, and this is a technical problem because niceness is associated with trait agreeableness, is that agreeable people are cannon fodder for psychopaths. So I don't believe that any of the conundrum that we're in at the moment in the West is strictly political. I think what's happened is that the predatory psychopaths have figured out how to cloak themselves in the guise of compassion.
During my travels, I found ordinary Canadians appalled at their country's surrender to drug dealers, its contempt for freedom of speech, its enforcement of gender ideology on children, and a breezy willingness to terminate the lives of its own citizens. However, for all of the depressing stories of people losing their jobs or being hounded by the government, these cases were equally inspirational. Whilst Canada is a warning to the West, there are also messages of hope from those brave individuals fighting for their freedom.